His fist hit the counter so hard the glass partition exploded. 7 feet of blood-soaked fury stood in the middle of the emergency room, and every single person in that building stopped breathing. He grabbed a metal tray stand and hurled it across the room like it weighed nothing. Nurses screamed, patients dove behind chairs. Security froze. This man was not here for help. He was here to destroy everything in his path. And the only person who didn't run was a 24-year-old rookie nurse who had been on the job for exactly 29 days. What she did next silenced everyone. If this story moves you, subscribe to the channel, follow this story to the very end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. The call came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. Emily Carter was standing at the nurse's station, filling out paperwork for a patient in bed, a 70-year-old man with chest pain who kept calling her sweetheart and asking if she was old enough to be a nurse. She smiled every time he said it because the truth was she barely felt old enough herself. 29 days. That's how long she'd been working at Riverside General Hospital. Not even a full month. And every single one of those 29 days, somebody on the staff had reminded her in one way or another that she didn't belong. Carter, did you check the IV drip on bed 4? That was Denise Holloway, the charge nurse. Denise had been running the ER night shift for 14 years, and she wore her authority like armor. She didn't ask questions. She gave orders. Yes, I checked it 20 minutes ago, Emily said. Check it again. Emily opened her mouth, then closed it. She picked up her clipboard and walked toward bed 4 without another word. That was the rhythm of her life now. Do what you're told. Don't talk back. Don't make waves. Prove you belong by surviving long enough that they stop watching you. She passed Dr. Alan Reeves on her way down the hall. He was leaning against the wall outside trauma room, sipping coffee from a paper cup and looking at his phone. He didn't look up when she walked by. He never did. Doctor. Reeves was the attending physician on duty that night. 46 years old, 15 years in emergency medicine, and absolutely convinced that he had seen everything worth seeing. He had a reputation for being calm under pressure. But Emily had noticed something else about him in her 4 weeks he was calm because he had stopped caring. Not about medicine, about people. She checked the IV on bed 4. It was fine. It had been fine 20 minutes ago. She adjusted the flow rate by a fraction of a degree just so she could write something on the chart, and then she walked back to the station. That's when the radio crackled. Dispatch to Riverside General. Be advised we have an incoming individual male, approximately 30 years of age, on foot, heading toward your ER entrance. Reports of erratic behavior, possible assault victim covered in blood. Police are en route, but ETA is 12 minutes. Proceed with caution. Denise grabbed the radio. Copy that. How big is he? There was a pause. Then the dispatcher's voice came back, and Emily would never forget the way it sounded, like the woman on the other end was choosing her words very carefully. Ma'am, witnesses are describing him as approximately 7 feet tall, possibly taller. He is extremely agitated. He has already thrown a parking meter out of the concrete. I repeat, proceed with extreme caution. Denise set the radio down. She looked at the staff around her. There were 6 people at the station. 2 nurses besides Emily, 1 physician's assistant, 1 security guard named Ron Phelps, and Dr. Reeves, who had finally looked up from his phone. Lock it down, Denise said. Ron, get to the door. Nobody comes in until police arrive. Ron Phelps was 58 years old and had been the night security guard at Riverside for 9 years. He was a good man, a kind man. He was also 5'9", 170 pounds, and he had a bad knee from a fall he took 2 winters ago. He picked up his radio, called for backup that wouldn't arrive for at least 10 minutes, and walked toward the ER entrance with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who knew he was walking towards something he couldn't handle. Emily watched him go. Her heart was beating faster now. She could feel it in her throat, pressing against her vocal cords like it wanted to escape. Carter. Denise's voice was sharp. Get the patients in the East Wing moved back. Close the curtains. Keep them calm. Go. Emily nodded and turned to move, but she only got 3 steps before the doors exploded. Not opened, exploded. The automatic sliding doors of the ER entrance were designed to withstand a significant amount of force. They were reinforced glass set in steel frames with electronic locks that engaged during lockdown. Ron Phelps had activated the lockdown 30 seconds earlier. It didn't matter. The man hit those doors with his shoulder, and they came apart like they were made of paper. The glass didn't just crack, it shattered outward in a spray that sent Ron stumbling backward, his arms up to shield his face. One of the steel frames bent inward at a 45-degree angle, hanging from a single hinge like a broken arm. And then he was inside. Emily's first thought, and she would be ashamed of this thought later, though she had no reason to be, was that he wasn't real. He couldn't be real. People were not that big. He had to be something else, something out of a nightmare, something her exhausted mind had conjured after too many 12-hour shifts. But he was real. He was 7 feet and 2 inches tall. He weighed 314 pounds. His name was Marcus Dean Thompson, and 6 hours earlier he had been a gentle, soft-spoken furniture mover who sang gospel songs in his truck between deliveries. Now he was covered in blood, his own and someone else's, and his eyes were wide and wild and full of something that Emily recognized instantly, though no one else in that room could see it. Error. He wasn't angry, he was terrified. But nobody else saw that. What they saw was a monster. Marcus swept his arm across the admissions counter and sent a computer monitor, a phone, a stack of files, and a cup of coffee crashing to the floor. He let out a sound, not a roar, not a scream, something in between, something primal and desperate, and he slammed both fists down on the counter so hard that the laminate surface cracked down the middle. "Somebody help me," he screamed. "Somebody help me. I can't see right. Something's wrong with me." But his words were slurred. They tumbled out of his mouth in a rush that sounded less like speech and more like growling. And because of his size, because of the blood, because of the shattered doors and the broken counter, and the sheer overwhelming violence of his entrance, nobody heard the words. They only heard the threat. Ron Phelps was on the floor scrambling backward. He keyed his radio with shaking hands. "I need police at Riverside General. We have a violent individual in the ER. Now." Dr. Reeves dropped his coffee. The cup hit the floor and the lid popped off and brown liquid spread across the white tile. And he stood there watching it for a moment, as if the coffee were more interesting than the giant destroying his emergency room. "Sedate him, Reeves said. His voice was steady, but his face was pale. "Denise, get a sedation kit. We can't get close enough to sedate him," Denise shouted. She had backed against the far wall and was shielding a patient who had been sitting in a wheelchair. "Look at him. He'll kill anyone who gets near him." Marcus grabbed the metal tray stand, the tall one on wheels that held surgical instruments, and lifted it over his head like it was a broomstick. He threw it. It hit the wall 6 feet from where Darius was standing, and the crash was so loud that Emily felt it in her teeth. "Stay back," Marcus screamed. "Don't touch me! Don't you touch me!" He was spinning now, turning in circles, his massive arms swinging wildly. A ceiling tile came down. A fluorescent light shattered. Sparks rained from the fixture. A patient in bed, too, started screaming. An old woman in the waiting area began to cry. Emily stood perfectly still. She was 10 feet from the nurse's station, frozen in the middle of the hallway, and she could not move. Her legs would not obey her. Her hands were trembling at her sides. She could feel the vibration in the floor every time Marcus stomped or swung or threw something. And each vibration traveled up through her shoes and into her bones and told her the same thing over and over. Run, run, run. But she didn't run. And the reason she didn't run was something she had never told anyone at Riverside General. Something she had never written on her resume or mentioned in her interview or shared during the awkward get-to-know-you lunch on her first day. Her brother, his name was Daniel James Carter. He was 3 years older than Emily, and when she was growing up, he was the center of her world. He taught her to ride a bike. He walked her to school every morning until she was 12. He called her M, and no one else was allowed to use that name. When Daniel was 19, he was in a car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit his car on the driver's side at 50 miles per hour. Daniel survived, but he sustained a traumatic brain injury that changed everything. The brother who had been gentle and patient and kind became someone who screamed at walls, who threw furniture, who once put his fist through the bathroom door at 3 a.m. because he couldn't remember where he was. Emily was 16 when the accident happened. For the next 6 years, she was Daniel's primary caregiver. Her parents worked. They didn't have money for professional help. So Emily learned. She learned what a TBI looked like from the inside. She learned the difference between aggression and fear. She learned that when Daniel was at his most violent, He was also at his most afraid, and that the worst thing you could do was match his energy with force. Force made it worse. Every time, without exception. What worked was stillness. What worked was a voice that said, "I'm here, I'm not going anywhere, you're safe." It didn't work every time. It didn't work fast, but it worked more often than anything else. And Emily carried that knowledge in her body the way a soldier carries muscle memory, deep, automatic, beyond thought. She stared at Marcus Dean Thompson, 7 feet of blood and kelp and destruction, and she saw Daniel. She saw her brother. Not the size, not the blood, the eyes. The way his pupils were dilated unevenly, one larger than the other. The way his movements were wild but uncoordinated, not the controlled violence of someone who wanted to hurt people, but the flailing of someone whose body had stopped listening to his brain. The way he kept grabbing his head with both hands between outbursts and pressing his palms against his temples as if he were trying to hold his skull together. Something was wrong with his brain, something acute, something happening right now. Emily's legs unlocked. She took a step forward. "Carter," Denise's voice was a whip crack. Get back right now." Emily didn't stop. She took another step. "Doctor." Reeves had retreated behind the nurse's station. He was on the phone talking to someone, police, hospital administration, she didn't know. He looked up and saw Emily moving toward Marcus, and his eyes went wide. "Nurse Carter, stop! That is a direct order." Emily heard him. She understood him. She kept walking. Marcus had just thrown a chair. It hit the vending machine in the corner, and the glass front of the machine shattered, and cans of soda and bottles of water tumbled out onto the floor, rolling in every direction. He stood in the middle of the destruction, breathing hard, his massive chest heaving, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead and from his hands where the glass from the doors had cut him. He saw Emily coming toward him, his whole body tensed. His fists came up. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals do one of two things: they flee or they fight. Marcus couldn't flee. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know why he was here. The injury in his brain had stolen his navigation, his language processing, his impulse control. All he had left was fight. Emily stopped 8 feet from him, close enough that he could reach her in 2 steps. Close enough that if he swung, she would not be able to dodge. She did not raise her hands. She did not back away. She stood there, 5'4", 125 pounds, 24 years old, and she looked up at him the way she used to look up at Daniel during his worst nights. Marcus. She didn't know his name yet. She wouldn't learn it for another hour. But she said it anyway because the dispatcher had used it, and it had lodged somewhere in the back of her mind without her knowing. "Marcus, I can see that something is wrong. I can see that you are hurting. I'm not going to touch you. I'm not going to come any closer. I'm just going to stand right here." His fist was cocked back. His arm was trembling. Every muscle in his body was coiled to strike. "You're in a hospital," Emily said. Her voice was steady. Later, she would marvel at that, how her voice could be so steady when every cell in her body was vibrating with fear. "You came here because you need help, and I'm going to help you. But I need you to hear me first. Can you hear me, Marcus?" His arm didn't drop, but it didn't swing. Behind her, the ER had gone completely silent. Denise had stopped shouting. Ron Phelps had stopped crawling. Dr. Reeves had lowered the phone from his ear. Every single person in that emergency room was watching the smallest person on the staff stand in front of the largest threat any of them had ever seen. And no one moved to stop her. Not because they trusted her, because they were too afraid to get any closer. "I'm not going to hurt you," Emily said again. "Nobody here is going to hurt you. You're bleeding, and I think your head is hurt. And that's why everything feels so wrong right now. That's why you can't think straight. It's not your fault. Something happened to your head, and it's making everything loud and scary and confusing. I know what that feels like. I've seen it before." Marcus's breathing changed. It was still fast, still ragged, but the rhythm shifted. The gasp became longer. The exhales became deeper. His fist was still raised. Emily took one more step, 7 feet between them now. "Don't!" Not someone behind her hissed. She didn't turn to see who. "You came here for help," Emily said. "And I'm the help. That's my job. That's the only reason I'm here. So I'm going to stay right here with you until you're ready. There's no rush. There's no timer. I'm not going anywhere. Marcus's lips moved. He was trying to say something. The words came out, broken, garbled pieces of syllables crashing into each other. My head. I can't. It won't stop. The noise won't stop. I know, Emily said. I know the noise won't stop. We're going to make it stop. But first I need you to do one thing for me. Just one thing. Can you put your hand down? Not because I'm scared of you. Because your arm must be so tired. You've been fighting so hard. You can rest now. His arm trembled, the fist shook. A drop of blood fell from his knuckle and hit the floor. And then slowly, so slowly that it seemed to take a full minute, his arm came down. A sound moved through the emergency room. It wasn't a gasp, it wasn't a sigh. It was something between the two, the collective release of breath from a dozen people who had been holding it without knowing. Marcus's arm hung at his side. His chin dropped to his chest. His shoulders, which had been bunched up around his ears, like armor, began to lower. Good, Emily whispered. That's good. That's so good, Marcus. You're doing great. His knees buckled. All 7 feet and 314 pounds of Marcus Dean Thompson collapsed to the floor of the emergency room like a building coming down, and the impact shook the tiles and rattled the remaining windows and sent a tremor through the foundation that people felt 2 floors up in the maternity ward. Emily didn't flinch. She didn't jump back. She dropped to her knees beside him, and she put her hand, her small, trembling human hand, on his massive shoulder, and she held it there. I'm here, she said. I'm not going anywhere. You're safe now. Marcus began to cry, not the way adults usually cry, controlled, restrained, embarrassed. He cried the way children cry, with his whole body, great heaving sobs that shook his frame and sent tears and blood streaming down his face in equal measure. I don't know what's happening to me, he choked out. I don't know where I am. I was driving, and then everything went white, and I was on the ground, and there was blood, and I couldn't remember my name. I couldn't remember my own name. Emily looked up at Denise. Their eyes met across the wreckage of the emergency room, the shattered glass, the broken furniture, the scattered papers and spilled coffee and dented walls. Get Dr. Reeves, Emily said, and this time her voice was not a request. It was not the voice of a rookie nurse asking permission. It was the voice of someone who had just taken control of the room and everyone in it knew it. He needs a CT scan, now, right now. I think he has a brain bleed. Denise didn't argue. She didn't question. She didn't pull rank. She turned and ran. Denise ran like she hadn't run in years. Her shoes slapped the tile so hard that the sound echoed down the hallway and mixed with the fading sobs of the giant on the floor. She found Dr. Reeves standing behind the nurse's station phone, still in his hands, staring through the glass partition at the scene in front of him like he was watching a nature documentary instead of living through an emergency. Reeves, Denise grabbed his arm. She says he needs a CT. She thinks it's a brain bleed. Dr. Reeves looked at Denise. Then he looked past her at Emily, who was still on her knees beside Marcus, her hand on his shoulder, her voice a low, steady murmur that no one else could hear. She's a rookie, Reeves said. She doesn't get to diagnose. Alan, look at his pupils. Look at them. Reeves didn't move. He set the phone down slowly, like a man deciding whether or not to take an order from someone he considered beneath him. 14 years of emergency medicine had taught him many things, but the most dangerous thing it had taught him was that he was always right. We sedate him first, Reeves said. I'm not putting a violent patient into a CT scanner without... He's not violent anymore. Denise's voice cracked. She pointed at Marcus, who was curled on his side on the floor, crying into his own hands, while Emily knelt beside him, speaking words none of them could hear. Does that look violent to you? Reeves stared at the scene for 3 full seconds. Then he blinked and something shifted in his face, not compassion, not understanding, but calculation. The calculation of a man who realized that if this patient died on his floor tonight, there would be questions. And those questions would have his name attached to them. Fine, he said. Get him on a gurney. I want a full neuro workup and a contrast CT, and someone get that nurse away from him before he snaps again. Denise turned to relay the order, but she stopped. She looked back at Reeves with an expression that Emily would have recognized if she'd seen it, the expression of a woman who had spent 14 years biting her tongue and had just tasted blood. Nobody's pulling her away from him, Denise said quietly. She's the only reason we're all still standing. She walked away before he could respond. On the floor, Marcus was trying to speak again. His words came in fragments, each one costing him visible effort, like he was pulling them out of deep water one at a time. I was driving the truck, the furniture truck. I had a delivery on Maple Street, and then, take your time, Emily said. There's no rush. Something hit me, I think, or I hit something. I don't know. I was driving and then I was on the ground and there was blood everywhere and I didn't know whose blood it was. And I started walking and I couldn't stop walking and everything was so loud. Everything was so loud. He had called her M. He didn't know her name. He didn't know anyone's name. But the syllable had come out of his mouth like a reflex, like his broken brain was reaching for something familiar and had found nothing but the shape of a sound. Emily's throat tightened. Only one person in the world had ever called her M. I hear you, she said. You were in an accident, Marcus. Something happened to your head, and that's why everything feels wrong. But you're in the right place now. We're going to take care of you. Am I dying? The question came out clear, perfectly clear. As if for one brief moment the fog in his brain had parted, and the real Marcus, the gentle gospel-singing furniture mover, had surfaced just long enough to ask the only question that mattered. Emily looked him in the eye. Not tonight, she said, not on my watch. Two orderlies arrived with a gurney. They were both young men, both strong and both visibly terrified. They stopped 6 feet from Marcus and looked at Emily like she was the commanding officer, and they were waiting for orders. We need to get him onto the gurney, Emily said. Marcus, these two men are going to help you stand up. They're not going to hurt you. I'm going to be right here the entire time. Okay. Marcus looked at the orderlies. His body tensed. Emily felt the muscles in his shoulder coil under her hand, and for one terrible second, she thought she had lost him, thought the fear was going to surge back, and the violence would return, and everything she had built in the last few minutes would shatter. Marcus! Her voice was firm now, not loud, firm, the way a mother speaks to a child who is about to touch a hot stove. Look at me. Not them. Me. He looked at her. I promised you I'm not going anywhere. Have I moved? He shook his head. Have I lied to you? He shook his head again. Then trust me one more time. Let them help you up. I'll be right beside you. Marcus closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had changed. The wildness was still there, lurking behind his pupils, like an animal behind a fence, but it was contained, held. Not by drugs or restraints, but by the thin, unbreakable thread of trust that a 24-year-old rookie nurse had woven out of nothing but her voice and her refusal to leave. He nodded. The orderlies moved in. They got on either side of him, and with Emily guiding them, they helped Marcus to his feet. It took all three of them, and even then his knees buckled twice. He was 6 inches taller than the taller orderly. He looked down at them like a man standing on a cliff, looking down at the ocean, dizzy and disoriented, and holding on to consciousness by a thread. They got him on the gurney. The gurney groaned under his weight, but held. Emily kept her hand on his arm the entire time, not gripping, just resting there, a point of contact and anchor. I'm right here, she kept saying. I'm right here. They wheeled him down the hallway toward radiology. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and Marcus flinched at everyone turning his head away from the brightness, like it was burning him. Emily noticed and positioned herself on the side nearest the lights, using her body to cast a small shadow over his face. Nobody told her to do that. Nobody had ever taught her that. She just did it. They reached the CT suite at 12:14 a.m. The radiology tech on duty was a woman named Sharon, who had been asleep in the break room when her pager went off. She took one look at Marcus on the gurney, and her face went white. That's my patient, Emily said before Sharon could speak. His name is Marcus. He's been in some kind of accident, and I believe he has a head injury. He's cooperative, but he's scared, and loud noises make it worse. Can you keep the room as quiet as possible? Sharon looked at Emily, then she looked at Denise, who had followed them down the hall. Denise gave a single nod. Okay, Sharon said, and let's do this. Getting Marcus into the CT scanner was like threading a needle with a telephone pole. He was too tall for the standard positioning. His shoulders were too broad. Sharon had to adjust the cradle twice, and each adjustment made a mechanical clicking sound that sent Marcus's heart rate spiking on the portable monitor. Marcus, that's just the machine adjusting, Emily said. She was standing right at the edge of the scanner, as close as she could get without interfering with the imaging. It's going to make some humming sounds in a minute. That's normal. It doesn't hurt. It's just taking pictures of your head so we can see what's going on in there. You'll stay? I'll stay. Promise. I promise. The scanner started. It hummed and clicked and whirred. And Marcus lay rigid on the table with his fists clenched at his sides and his jaw locked tight. And Emily stood there counting the seconds, talking him through each one. That's 10 seconds. Good. 20 seconds. You're doing great. 30 seconds. Almost halfway. The scan took 4 minutes. It felt like 40. When it was done, Sharon pulled the images up on her screen. She looked at them for exactly 3 seconds, and then she looked at Emily with an expression that Emily would remember for the rest of her life. Get Reeves, Sharon said. Get him now. Emily's stomach dropped. What is it? Epidural hematoma. Left temporal. It's big. It's really big. Emily didn't know the exact mortality statistics for an epidural hematoma of that size, but she knew enough. She knew that blood was pooling between Marcus's skull and the membrane surrounding his brain. She knew that the pressure was building. She knew that if they didn't relieve that pressure soon, Marcus Dean Thompson, the gentle giant who sang gospel songs in his truck, was going to die on a hospital gurney while the staff argued about protocols. She turned and ran. For the first time that night, Emily Carter ran. She found Dr. Reeves back at the nurse's station, writing notes in a chart. Writing notes. While his patient's brain was being crushed by its own blood doctor, Alan Reeves was documenting the damage to hospital property for the incident report. Dr. Reeves, Emily was breathing hard. Epidural hematoma, left temporal. Sharon says it's large. We need neurosurgery now. Reeves looked up from his chart. He clicked his pen. He clicked it twice slowly like a man with all the time in the world. I'll call neuro, he said. Go back to your station, Carter. He doesn't have time for you to call neuro and wait. He needs to go to the OR. Nurse Carter. Reeves set his pen down. He looked at her the way a professor looks at a student who has spoken out of turn in a lecture hall. I have been practicing emergency medicine since before you graduated high school. I will handle the patient. You will go back to your station and attend to the patients you are actually qualified to treat. Are we clear? Emily stood there. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear. She had used up all her fears standing in front of a 7-foot man with a brain injury and murder in his muscles. Her hands were shaking from something else entirely. Something hotter. Something she had never allowed herself to feel in a professional setting. Rage. Dr. Reeves, she said, and her voice was low and even and dangerous. If that man dies because you took 15 minutes to make a phone call, when you could have walked to the OR in 2, I will make sure every person in this hospital knows exactly what happened tonight. Every person, starting with the chief of medicine and ending with the local news. The emergency room went quiet. Not the terrified quiet of 30 minutes ago when Marcus was destroying the place. A different quiet. The quiet of people witnessing something they never expected to see, a rookie nurse threatening an attending physician's career to his face. Reeves stared at her. His jaw worked. His nostrils flared. For a moment, Emily was certain he was going to fire her on the spot, tell her to collect her things and never come back. Then Denise spoke. She's right, Alan. Reeves looked at Denise. Denise, who had worked beside him for 8 years. Denise, who had never contradicted him in front of staff. Denise, who was looking at him now with the same expression she had worn earlier, the expression of a woman who was done biting her tongue. The scan shows a large epidural hematoma, Denise said. If we wait for neuro to call back, we could be looking at herniation. You know that. I know you know that. Reeves looked from Denise to Emily to the hallway leading to radiology where Marcus was lying on a table with a ticking bomb inside his skull. He picked up the phone. He dialed 3 numbers. And when someone answered, he said 6 words that Emily would replay in her mind 1,000 times. I need an OR right now. 12:29 a.m., 42 minutes since Marcus had walked through those doors. 42 minutes since 12 people ran and 1 person stayed. The neurosurgery team arrived in 9 minutes. Dr. Patricia Sung, the on-call neurosurgeon, was a small woman with short gray hair and steady hands and a reputation for never wasting words. She looked at the CT images for less than 10 seconds. Prep him, she said. We're going in. They wheeled Marcus toward the elevator that would take him to the surgical floor. Emily walked beside the gurney, her hand still on his arm. Marcus was fading now. His eyes were half closed. His words had stopped making sense 5 minutes ago, replaced by mumbles and fragments that sounded like pieces of a prayer. "Marcus," Emily said, "they're going to take you into surgery now. They're going to fix what's broken. When you wake up, the noise will be gone." His hand moved, slowly, weakly. His massive fingers found her wrist and wrapped around it. His grip was gentle, impossibly gentle for a hand that had ripped steel doors off their hinges an hour ago. "Don't go," he whispered. "I'll be here when you wake up." "Promise," Emily swallowed. She knew she couldn't go into the OR. She knew that once those elevator doors closed, she would be standing in a hallway alone, with nothing to do but wait and hope and pray that the gentle man inside the giant's body would survive what was happening inside his own skull. "I promise," she said. The elevator doors opened. The surgical team wheeled him in. Emily's hand slid from his arm as the gurney moved past her, and Marcus's fingers held onto her wrist until the very last possible second, until the distance stretched his reach to its limit and his hand fell away. The doors closed. Emily stood in the hallway alone, staring at the brushed steel of the elevator doors. Her reflection stared back at her, small, blood-smeared, exhausted, shaking. She pressed her back against the wall and slid down to the floor. And that was where Denise found her 3 minutes later, sitting on the cold tile with her knees pulled to her chest and her arms wrapped around them, crying so hard that no sound was coming out. Denise didn't say anything. She didn't offer advice or comfort or a motivational speech. She sat down on the floor beside Emily, the charge nurse with 14 years of experience, sitting on a hospital floor at 12:45 in the morning, next to a rookie who had just done something that none of them could have done. They sat there together. Denise put her hand on Emily's back. Emily cried. After a while, Emily's breathing slowed. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of Marcus's dried blood across her cheek. "I shouldn't have threatened Reeves," Emily said. Her voice was raw, scraped. "No," Denise said. "You absolutely should have. He'll fire me. Let him trust." Emily looked at Denise. It was the first time in 29 days that anyone on the staff had looked at her without the filter of judgment or dismissal or patronizing patience. Denise was looking at her the way one soldier looks at another after a firefight, with recognition, with respect earned in the only currency that matters. "How did you know?" Denise asked. "Know what? How to reach him, how to calm him down. That wasn't training. I've been doing this for 14 years and I wouldn't have done what you did. I would have waited for security. I would have waited for the sedation. I would have done everything by the book, and he would have hurt someone, or we would have hurt him, and either way, it would have ended badly." "How did you know?" Emily was quiet for a long time. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed above them, indifferent. "My brother," Emily said finally. "He had a TBI when I was 16. For 6 years, I was the one who talked him down. Every time. Every single time. You learn the signs. You learn that the violence isn't the person. It's the injury. And you learn that the only thing that reaches through the injury is the one thing everyone else is too scared to offer. What's that presence, just being there, not running, not fighting, just staying?" Denise nodded slowly. She didn't ask more questions. She didn't need to. The answer was sitting right next to her, a young woman who had walked into the mouth of a storm and spoken to the human being trapped inside it. Upstairs, Dr. Sung was cutting into Marcus Thompson's skull. Downstairs, Emily Carter was sitting on a cold floor, wondering if the promise she had made to a dying man was one she'd be able to keep. The clock on the wall read 12:51 a.m. The surgery would take hours. The waiting had just begun. 1:17 a.m. Emily was still on the floor. Denise had left 10 minutes ago to manage the ER. There were still patients, still injuries, still a waiting room full of people who had just watched a giant tear the place apart and were now sitting in shock, wondering if it was safe to breathe. But Emily hadn't moved. She sat with her back against the wall outside the elevator, her knees drawn up, staring at nothing, listening to the hum of the building around her, as if she could hear through 2 floors of concrete and steel to the operating room where Dr. Sung was cutting into Marcus Thompson's skull. Her phone buzzed in her scrub pocket. She pulled it out. The screen was cracked. She didn't remember when that had happened. Maybe when she dropped to her knees beside Marcus. Maybe before that. And through the spider web of broken glass, she saw a text from her mother. "How's your shift going? Honey, quiet night." Emily almost laughed. She pressed the phone against her forehead and closed her eyes and felt the cracked glass cool against her skin. Her mother didn't know. Her mother never knew the real details. Emily had learned long ago that telling her mother the truth about her work, about the blood, the screaming, the nightly confrontation with the worst moments of strangers' lives only made her mother worry. And her mother had worried enough. She had spent 6 years worrying about Daniel, watching her son become someone she didn't recognize. Watching her 16-year-old daughter become a caregiver at an age when she should have been worrying about prom dresses and college applications. Emily typed back, "Quiet night, love you." She hit send. She put the phone away. Footsteps coming down the hallway. Heavy, deliberate, the unmistakable rhythm of a man who wanted his presence announced before his arrival. Dr. Reeves. Emily didn't stand up. She didn't have the energy to stand, and even if she had, she wasn't sure she would have given him the satisfaction. Reeves stopped 3 feet from her. He looked down at her sitting on the floor, and his face was a mask that Emily couldn't read. Anger, maybe. Embarrassment. Something else she couldn't name. "Carter." "Dr. Reeves, you threatened me in front of my staff." "Yes, I did. That's grounds for immediate termination." "I know." He stood there. She sat there. The fluorescent light above them flickered once, casting a brief shadow across his face that made him look older than his 46 years. "The CT confirmed an epidural hematoma," Reeves said. "Left temporal, approximately 60 milliliters. Dr. Sung is performing a craniotomy now. If we had waited another 20 minutes for the standard neuroconsult callback, the patient would likely have herniated." Emily looked up at him. "I know," she said again. "You diagnosed a condition that takes most physicians years of clinical experience to identify on site, and you did it from across a room while the patient was actively destroying the emergency department." Emily said nothing. She waited. Reeves's jaw tightened. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the wall. He looked everywhere, except at the 24-year-old woman sitting on the floor in front of him. "I should have listened to you sooner," he said. The words came out stiff, mechanical, as if he were reading them from a card he'd been forced to memorize. But they came out, and that was something. "Yes," Emily said. "You should have." Reeves nodded once. Then he turned and walked back down the hallway without another word. His footsteps echoed off the tile, getting softer and softer until they disappeared around the corner, and Emily sat alone again in the quiet. But something had changed. Something small and tectonic had shifted in the ground beneath her, and she could feel it even though she couldn't name it. For 29 days she had been invisible, a placeholder, a warm body filling a shift that no one else wanted. And in the space of 1 hour, she had become something else entirely, someone who could not be ignored. She stood up. Her legs ached. Her lower back was stiff from kneeling on the hard floor beside Marcus. She leaned against the wall for a moment, steadied herself, and then walked back to the ER. 1:33 a.m. The emergency room looked like a disaster zone. The shattered doors had been cordoned off with yellow caution tape. Maintenance had swept up the worst of the glass, but there were still fragments embedded in the carpet of the waiting area, glinting under the lights like tiny stars. The bent steel door frame hung at its broken angle, and someone had propped a folding table against the opening to create a makeshift barrier. 2 police officers had arrived while Emily was sitting in the hallway. They were standing at the nurse's station talking to Denise, notepads open, pens poised. When Emily walked in, all 3 of them turned to look at her. "That's her," Denise said. "That's Nurse Carter." The older officer, mid-50s, gray mustache, the weathered look of a man who had seen enough human wreckage to last several lifetimes, studied Emily for a moment. "You're the one who calmed him down." "Yes." "By yourself." "Yes." He looked at his partner, a younger woman, who was writing everything down. Then he looked back at Emily. "Ma'am, I've been on the force for 27 years. I've seen trained crisis negotiators fail to do what the staff here is telling me you did tonight." How? Emily thought about the question. She thought about giving the real answer: Daniel, the accident, the 6 years, the screaming at 3 a.m., and the holes in the bathroom door, and the way her brother's eyes looked when the injury took over, and the real Daniel disappeared behind a wall of neurological chaos. But she was tired. She was so tired that the truth felt too heavy to carry across the distance between her mouth and the officer's ears. "I just talked to him," she said. The officer waited for more. More didn't come. "All right," he said. He wrote something in his notebook and closed it. "We'll need a full statement from you before end of shift. But for now, I'd say you did a hell of a thing tonight, Nurse Carter." He walked away. His partner followed. Emily stood at the edge of the ER and looked at the destruction and felt nothing. Not pride, not relief, not satisfaction. Just an enormous hollow exhaustion that went deeper than muscle and bone and settled somewhere in the center of her chest like a stone. 1:48 a.m. Emily went to the staff bathroom. She locked the door. She turned on the faucet and let the water run cold and splashed it on her face again and again until the water in the sink turned pink with Marcus's blood washing off her skin. She looked at herself in the mirror, the dark circles under her eyes, the streak of dried blood on her cheek that she'd missed, the slight tremor in her hands that wouldn't stop no matter how hard she pressed them against the porcelain edge of the sink. She thought about Daniel. She hadn't let herself think about him in hours. She had locked that door in her mind the way she locked it every time she walked into a hospital, because if she opened it, the memories would flood in and she would drown in them. But the lock was broken now. Marcus had broken it. Marcus, with his slurred speech and his wild eyes and his massive gentle hands and his voice crying out for help in a language his own brain wouldn't let him speak. Daniel had been dead for 2 years. She hadn't told anyone at Riverside General. It wasn't on her file. It wasn't something she talked about. Daniel James Carter, age 29, had died in his sleep on a Tuesday morning in March, 2 years before Emily started her first nursing job. The official cause was complications from his traumatic brain injury, a seizure that came in the night, silent and final, taking him while Emily slept in the next room. She had found him in the morning. She had walked into his room with a cup of coffee and a plan to take him to his physical therapy appointment, and he was lying in bed with his eyes closed and his face relaxed and his body still. So still. After years of watching him thrash and fight and scream, the stillness was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. Emily gripped the edge of the sink. The tremor in her hands got worse. She had become a nurse because of Daniel. Not because she wanted to save people. That was the answer she gave in interviews, the polished version, the one that fit neatly into a personal statement. The real reason was uglier and more honest. She became a nurse because she had failed to save her brother, and she needed to prove to herself, to the universe, to whatever cruel arithmetic governed who lived and who died, that his death hadn't been for nothing. That the 6 years she spent learning to read the language of a broken brain would mean something. That she could carry his legacy in her hands and use it to keep other people alive. And tonight she had, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like reaching into a fire and pulling someone out, and then standing there with burned hands, wondering why saving a stranger didn't bring your brother back. She turned off the faucet. She dried her face. She looked in the mirror one more time and said out loud in a voice so quiet that only the tiles could hear, "I kept my promise, Danny. I stayed." Then she unlocked the door and went back to work, 2:11 a.m. The ER had settled into the uneasy rhythm that follows catastrophe, a forced normalcy that everyone performs but nobody believes. Nurses checked on patients. Monitors beeped. The maintenance crew worked on removing the damaged door frame with a power drill that whined like a trapped animal. Emily was charting at the nurses' station when Ron Phelps walked up to her. Ron, the security guard. The man who had been on the floor scrambling backward when Marcus came through those doors. He had a bandage on his right hand where the glass had cut him, and he walked with the careful slowness of a man whose bad knee had been tested beyond its limits. "Carter," he said, "got a minute?" "Sure, Ron." He leaned against the counter. He didn't look at her right away. He looked at his bandaged hand, turning it over slowly, as if checking to make sure his fingers still worked. "I want to apologize to you," he said. "For what?" "For not doing my job. I was supposed to be the one standing between that man and the rest of you. That's what they pay me for. That's what the badge is for. And when the moment came, I was on the floor. I was crawling backward on the floor like a kid who'd seen a ghost." "Ron, let me finish, please." He looked at her now and his eyes were red, not from injury, from the kind of shame that sits in a man's chest and presses on his lungs until breathing feels like penance. I froze. 20 years in security, before this job, 9 years here, and I froze. And you, 29 days, 120 pounds, soaking wet, you walked right up to him. You walked right up to a man who could have killed you with one hand, and you talked to him like he was a lost child. And I laid on the floor and watched. Emily put down her pen. She turned to face Ron fully, and she did something she hadn't done with anyone else that night. She touched his arm, not his shoulder, his arm, the way you touch someone when you want them to know you see them. Ron, listen to me. You didn't freeze because you're a coward. You froze because your body was protecting you. That's what the freeze response is. It's not weakness, it's biology. And the reason I didn't freeze is not because I'm braver than you. It's because I've seen this before. My body had practice. That's the only difference. Ron's lip trembled. He pressed it together hard the way men of his generation do when they feel tears coming and believe with every fiber of their being that tears are something to be fought. You're a good man, Emily said, and you got hurt tonight at protecting this place. That cut on your hand. That's because you were between Marcus and the staff when the glass came down. You didn't run from the doors. Ron, you went toward them. You activated the lockdown. You called for backup. You did everything right. Everything except the one thing that mattered. And the one thing that mattered got done. That's what counts. Ron looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly and his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, not defeat but release. The letting go of a weight he'd been carrying since the moment he hit the floor. You're something else, Carter, he said. You know that. He walked away. Emily watched him go, and she felt the stone in her chest shift slightly. Still there, still heavy, but no longer sitting on the sharpest edge. 2:37 a.m. Denise found Emily restocking the supply cart in the hallway. It was mindless work, counting gauze pads, checking expiration dates on saline bags, organizing syringes by gauge. And Emily was doing it with the focused intensity of someone who needed her hands busy so her mind would stay quiet. Surgery update, Denise said. Emily's hands stopped moving. A box of latex gloves hung suspended between the cart and the shelf. Soon drained the hematoma, 62 milliliters of blood. She said another 15 to 20 minutes and the pressure would have caused irreversible damage. He's in recovery now. Vitals are stabilizing. Emily set the gloves down. She pressed both palms flat on the cart and leaned forward, and for a moment Denise thought she was going to collapse. But she didn't collapse. She was breathing, deliberately, slowly, in and out, the way someone breathes when they are choosing not to fall apart. Is he going to make it? Emily asked. Soong says the prognosis is good. He's young, he's strong, and we got to it in time. In time because of you. Emily shook her head. In time because Sharon read the CT fast. In time because Soong got here in 9 minutes. In time because the orderlies weren't too scared to help move him. In time because you stood in front of him when the rest of us ran. Denise's voice was steady and sharp and left no room for argument. Stop doing that. Doing what, Emma? Giving away credit that belongs to you. I've watched women do it their entire careers. Smart women. Brave women. They do something extraordinary, and then they spend the next hour explaining why it wasn't really them. It was you, Emily. Own it. Emily looked at Denise. It was the first time the charge nurse had called her by her first name. I'm scared, Denise. Of what? That it was luck. That next time I won't know what to do. That I walked up to a 7-foot man having a neurological crisis, and the only reason I'm standing here right now is because the coin landed on the right side. Denise was quiet for a moment. She crossed her arms and leaned against the wall, and when she spoke, her voice had lost its edge and found something warmer underneath, something that sounded like memory. 12 years ago, Denise said, I had a patient go into cardiac arrest in the middle of the waiting room. No warning. Healthy-looking guy, 42, came in for a sprained ankle. Just dropped. I was the only one with a clear line to him, and I started CPR, and I did it for 7 minutes until the crash team arrived. Saved his life. And you know what I did after? What? Threw up in the supply closet and cried for 20 minutes. Then I went back to work and told everyone I was fine. Emily stared at her. It's not luck, Denise said. One damn. Luck doesn't read neurological signs across a room. Luck doesn't know the difference between violence and fear. What you did tonight came from somewhere real. I don't know where, and you don't have to tell me. But wherever it came from, trust it, because this job will take everything from you if you let it. And the only thing that keeps you standing is knowing that the thing inside you, the thing that makes you walk toward the fire instead of away from it, is yours. Nobody gave it to you. Nobody can take it away. Emily's eyes filled. She blinked hard and looked at the ceiling and pressed her lips together tight. My brother, she said, he had a brain injury. 6 years I took care of him. He died 2 years ago. Denise uncrossed her arms. Her face changed not with pity, which Emily dreaded, but with understanding, which was the only thing she needed. That's where it came from, Denise said softly. That's where it came from. They stood in the hallway together. Two women in scrubs at 2:30 in the morning, surrounded by the aftermath of violence and the quiet machinery of healing, and something passed between them that neither of them would ever need to say out loud. It was the understanding that some people enter medicine because they are running from death, and some because they are running toward it, and the ones who last are the ones who learn to stop running and simply stand. 3:04 a.m., Emily's phone rang. She didn't recognize the number. Hello. Is this Nurse Carter, Emily Carter? Yes. This is Dr. Sung. I'm calling from the surgical floor. Your patient, Marcus Thompson, is awake. Emily's heart kicked. Already, is that normal? Nothing about tonight is normal, Nurse Carter. He's groggy and confused, but his neurological responses are strong. He's asking for someone. He doesn't know the name. He keeps saying, the one who stayed. I'm told that's you. Emily closed her eyes. The stone in her chest cracked, not all the way through, not yet, but enough that something warm leaked out from underneath it and spread through her body like the first light of morning. I'll be right there, she said. She hung up. She looked at Denise. Go, Denise said. I'll cover your patients. Emily didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. She turned and walked down the hallway toward the elevator, her footsteps quick and steady on the tile. She pressed the button. The doors opened. She stepped inside. The last time she had stood in this elevator, Marcus's fingers had been wrapped around her wrist, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to water. She had made him a promise. She had told him she would be there when he woke up. 3:07 a.m. The elevator doors opened on the surgical floor. Emily stepped out and turned left toward recovery. She could hear him before she saw him. Not screaming, not crying, humming. Low, deep broken, the melody cracked and incomplete, but unmistakably a hymn. A gospel song, maybe. The kind of song a man sings in his truck between furniture deliveries when he thinks nobody is listening. Emily walked into the recovery room. Marcus was lying in the bed, his head wrapped in white bandages, his eyes half open, his massive body still except for the gentle rise and fall of his chest. An IV drip hung beside him. A monitor beeped in time with his heartbeat steady now. Calm. He saw her, his eyes focused, and the look on his face, the recognition that broke through the fog of anesthesia and pain and confusion was the purest thing Emily had ever seen. You stayed, he whispered. Emily pulled a chair to the side of his bed. She sat down. She took his hand, the same hand that had ripped steel doors off their hinges, that had crushed a computer monitor that had been cocked back, ready to strike her less than 4 hours ago, and she held it. I told you I would, she said. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. They slid down his temples and disappeared into the white bandages wrapped around his head. I remember you, he said. I don't remember anything else, not the doors, not the screaming, not what I did. But I remember your voice. You said my name. You said I was safe. You are safe. I hurt people. Didn't I? I hurt people tonight. Emily squeezed his hand. You were hurt, Marcus. Your brain was bleeding. You didn't know what you were doing. But I did it. And you're alive. And nobody in that ER is seriously injured. And right now, right here, the only thing that matters is that your heart is beating and your brain is healing and you're going to be okay. Marcus closed his eyes. His grip on her hand tightened not with violence, but with need. The desperate, wordless need of a man who had woken up in a strange place with bandages on his head and gaps in his memory, and the terrible suspicion that he had become the thing he feared most. I sing in my truck, he said suddenly. His voice was drowsy drifting. Between deliveries, gospel songs. My mama taught me. She said if you fill the quiet with music, the devil can't get in. Your mama sounds wise. She's gone. 3 years now. Cancer. But I still sing her songs. Emily held his hand and said nothing. There was nothing to say. There was only this two strangers connected by the worst night of one of their lives, sitting together in a recovery room while the machines beeped and the world outside the window slept, and somewhere 3 floors below, a maintenance crew swept up the last of the broken glass. Marcus's breathing slowed, his grip on her hand loosened. The humming faded into the soft rhythmic breathing of genuine sleep, not unconsciousness, not the drugged void of anesthesia, but real healing human sleep. Emily didn't let go of his hand. She sat in the chair beside his bed and she watched the monitor trace the steady rhythm of his heart, and she stayed. 3:22 a.m. The recovery room was quiet. Marcus slept. Emily held on. And somewhere deep in the center of her chest, the stone that had been sitting there since her brother died cracked a little further. And a warmth she hadn't felt in 2 years began to spread slowly, carefully, like a seed pushing through frozen ground, toward light it couldn't yet see. 4:15 a.m. A nurse from the surgical floor touched Emily's shoulder and told her she needed to go back downstairs. Her shift wasn't over. She still had patience. Emily looked at Marcus sleeping in the recovery bed, his chest rising and falling in that deep, steady rhythm, and she didn't want to leave. Leaving felt like breaking something fragile, like lifting her hand off a wound before the bleeding had stopped. But she stood up. She gently set Marcus's hand on the bed beside him. She watched his fingers twitch once in his sleep, reaching for something that was no longer there, and then go still. She walked out of the recovery room and took the elevator back down to the ER. 4:21 a.m. The emergency room had transformed in the hours since Marcus's arrival. The broken door frame had been removed entirely, replaced by a sheet of plywood bolted across the opening. Patients entered through the side entrance, now guided by handwritten signs taped to the walls. The floor had been mopped. The shattered vending machine had been unplugged and pushed into a corner. The cracked admissions counter had been covered with a strip of duct tape that someone had applied in a perfectly straight line, as if neatness could undo catastrophe. Emily walked past all of it and went to the nurse's station. Her charts were stacked exactly where she'd left them. Her pen was on the counter. Her cold cup of coffee sat beside the keyboard with a ring of condensation around the base. Everything was the same, and nothing was the same. Carter. Dr. Reeves was standing at the other end of the station reading a chart. He didn't look up. Bed 9 needs a vitals check, and the patient in bed 3 has been asking for pain medication for 40 minutes. Emily picked up her clipboard. I'll take care of it. She expected more. A reprimand, a cold comment, some reminder of the hierarchy she had violated when she threatened him 3 hours ago. But Reeves said nothing else. He kept reading his chart, and Emily walked toward bed 9, and the night continued as if the world hadn't been torn apart and put back together in the space between midnight and dawn. She checked vitals on bed 9, a teenager with a broken wrist from a skateboarding accident. He was 17, scared, trying not to cry in front of his mother, who was sitting beside him, holding his unbroken hand and looking like she might cry, enough for both of them. Is it bad? The kid asked. His voice cracked on the word bad, splitting it into 2 syllables. Emily looked at the x-ray on the screen. Clean fracture, no displacement, 6 weeks in a cast, and he'd be fine. But she didn't say you'll be fine, because she'd learned from Daniel, always from Daniel, that telling someone in pain that they'll be fine is the same as telling them their pain doesn't matter. It's a clean break, she said. It's going to hurt for a while, and that's okay. Hurting means your body is paying attention. We're going to set it and put a cast on, and in about 6 weeks, you'll be back on that skateboard. 7 weeks, his mother said firmly. Minimum. The kid almost smiled. Emily almost smiled back. And for a moment in that tiny exchange between a frightened teenager and his overprotective mother, something in Emily's chest loosened a knot she hadn't known was tied. She moved to bed 3. The patient there was an older man, 68, with kidney stones. He had been waiting for pain medication since before Marcus arrived, and the chaos of the last 3 hours had pushed him to the bottom of everyone's priority list. He was sweating and gripping the bed rails, and his face was the color of old paper. Mr. Dawson, I'm so sorry for the wait, Emily said. I'm going to get you something for the pain right now. I heard what happened out there, Mr. Dawson said through clenched teeth. The big guy. They said a nurse talked him down. Was that you? Let's focus on getting you comfortable, Mr. Dawson. It was you, wasn't it? Emily administered the pain medication. She watched his face as the drug took hold, the slow unclenching of his jaw, the gradual release of his grip on the rails, the way his breathing shifted from short, sharp gasps to long, deliberate draws. Thank you, he said. His voice was different now, soft with relief. For the medicine and for what you did. My wife called me. She was in the waiting room when it happened. She said you walked right up to him. She said everyone else ran, but you walked right up to him like you weren't afraid. I was afraid, Emily said. That's the part that matters, Mr. Dawson said. Anybody can be brave when they're not scared. Being brave when you're terrified, that's the real thing. Emily adjusted his IV and checked his monitor and wrote on his chart, and she did all of it with steady hands, and she walked away before he could see that his words had hit her harder than Marcus's fist ever could have. 5:08 a.m. The shift was dragging now. The adrenaline that had carried Emily through the last 5 hours had burned off completely, leaving behind an exhaustion so deep that it felt chemical, like her blood had been replaced with something heavier. She leaned against the wall outside the supply closet and closed her eyes for 10 seconds, counting each one, giving herself that small mercy before pushing off and walking back into the light. Denise was at the nurse's station filling out the incident report. It was a thick form, multiple pages, boxes to check, lines to fill space for a narrative description that Denise was writing in her precise, angular handwriting. "I need your account for the report," Denise said without looking up. "Sit down and write it while it's fresh." Emily sat. Denise slid a blank form across the counter. Emily picked up a pen and stared at the first line. "Describe the events leading to the incident." She wrote, "At approximately 11:47 p.m., the ER received a dispatch warning about an incoming individual displaying erratic behavior." She stopped. She read what she'd written. It was accurate. It was clinical. It was exactly the kind of language incident reports required, detached, objective, scrubbed of anything human. But it was also a lie, not a factual lie, an emotional one, because what had happened tonight couldn't be contained in boxes and lines and describe the events. What had happened tonight was that a man's brain had tried to kill him, and his body had fought back the only way it knew how, and a woman who had spent 6 years loving a brother with the same injury had recognized the war behind his eyes and walked into it unarmed. None of that would fit in the form. Emily wrote the report. She kept it clinical. She kept it detached. She filled 3 pages in small, neat handwriting, and when she was done, she signed the bottom and slid it back to Denise. "Good," Denise said. She read through it quickly, nodded, and added it to her stack. Then she paused. "There's something you should know." "What?" Reeves called the chief of medicine, Dr. Elliott, woke him up at his house, told him what happened. Emily's stomach tightened. And Elliott is coming in at 7 for a full review. He wants to talk to everyone involved, including you." "Am I in trouble?" Denise looked at her. "You threatened an attending physician in front of the entire ER staff. You disobeyed a direct order to stand back from a violent patient. You performed what amounts to a field diagnosis without physician authorization. So technically, yes, you're in trouble." Emily nodded. She had expected this. From the moment she opened her mouth and told Dr. Reeves she would go to the chief of medicine and the local news, she had known there would be consequences. She had done it anyway. And sitting here now, exhausted and bloodstained, and running on nothing but coffee and adrenaline fumes, she would do it again. But Denise continued, and her voice dropped low enough that only Emily could hear. "Reeves also told Elliott that your field diagnosis was correct, that your intervention prevented injury to staff and patients, and that the patient would likely have died without the expedited surgical response that your insistence triggered." Emily blinked. "Reeves said that." "Well, Reeves said that, and why can..." "Because Alan Reeves is a lot of things, arrogant, cold, stubborn as a brick wall, but he's not stupid. He knows what happened tonight. He knows that if you hadn't pushed him, he would have followed protocol, and protocol would have killed that man. And he knows that when Elliott asks him why the patient survived, the honest answer is a 5'4" rookie nurse who wouldn't shut up." Emily let out a breath she'd been holding for hours. It came out shaky, ragged, and it carried with it something that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. She honestly couldn't tell the difference anymore. "Get some coffee," Denise said. "Real coffee, not that poison from the machine. There's a pot in the break room. Elliott's going to want to see you in 2 hours, and you look like you haven't slept in a week." "I haven't slept in a week." "Then drink 2 cups. 5:44 a.m. Emily sat in the break room with a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the previous administration. She held it with both hands, absorbing the warmth through the ceramic, letting it seep into her cold fingers. The break room was empty. The overhead light hummed. A motivational poster on the wall showed a cat hanging from a branch with the words, "Hang in there," printed in bold Comic Sans. Emily stared at the cat, and the cat stared back, and neither of them looked particularly convinced. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "Hi, this is Maria Thompson, Marcus's sister. The hospital gave me your name. I don't know how to thank you. I don't know if there are words. My brother is alive because of you. Please, please call me when you can. Emily read the message 3 times. She set the phone face down on the table. She pressed her palms against her eyes and breathed. Marcus had a sister. Of course he had a sister. He was a person. He had a family. He had a sister named Maria who was probably sitting in a waiting room somewhere in this hospital right now. Terrified, grateful, desperate for information, clinging to her phone the way Marcus had clung to Emily's wrist. Emily picked up the phone and typed, "Maria, this is Emily. Your brother is strong and he is being well taken care of. I'll come see you both as soon as I can." She hit send. The response came in 4 seconds. God bless you. God bless you. Oh man, 6:22 a.m. The night shift was ending. The day shift was arriving. Emily could hear them in the hallway. Fresh voices, fresh shoes, the particular energy of people who had slept and showered and eaten breakfast and had no idea what had happened 7 hours ago. They would find out soon enough. The plywood where the doors used to be would tell them. The cracked counter would tell them. The story would spread through the hospital like fire through dry grass, growing with each telling. Each retelling, adding or subtracting details until the truth became legend, and the legend became the kind of story people told new hires on their first day to scare them or inspire them, or both. Emily didn't want to be a story. She wanted to go home. She wanted to take a shower and wash Marcus's blood out of her hair and crawl into her bed and sleep until the world felt like a place she could understand again. But she couldn't go home. Not yet. Elliot was coming at 6:41 a.m. Emily went back to check on Marcus. She told herself it was a professional visit, a follow-up, a check on his vitals, the responsible thing to do. But the truth was simpler and harder. She needed to see him breathing. She took the elevator up. She walked down the hall. She could hear his voice before she reached the room, and this time it wasn't humming. He was talking. His words were clearer now, slower still, wrapped in the gauze of post-surgical fog, but recognizably human. Recognizably Marcus. "I don't remember the doors," he was saying. "I don't remember any of that. Maria, I swear I don't remember." Emily stopped outside the doorway. She could hear a woman's voice, Maria, she assumed, speaking quickly, urgently, the way people speak when they are trying to hold someone together and falling apart themselves. "The doctors said it's normal, Marcus. The injury affected your memory. You don't have to remember. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. They're telling me I destroyed an emergency room. They're telling me I threw things, I broke things, I scared people. Maria, I don't do that. You know I don't do that. I've never hurt anyone in my life. I know that. Everyone knows that. Do they? Because I'm lying here with a hole in my skull, and I'm pretty sure the police are going to want to talk to me, and how do I explain something I don't even remember doing?" Emily knocked softly on the doorframe. Both voices stopped. She stepped into view. Marcus saw her. His face changed. The confusion and shame and fear that had been pulling his features tight suddenly eased, as if someone had loosened a string that had been wound too tight. His eyes filled. "That's her," he said. His voice broke. "Maria, that's her. That's the one who stayed." Maria Thompson stood up from the chair beside the bed. She was small, smaller than Emily, with close-cropped hair and red eyes, and the kind of face that had clearly been crying for hours and was preparing to cry for hours more. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and took Emily's hands in hers and held them so tightly that Emily felt the bones in her fingers pressed together. "Thank you," Maria said. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." She said it like a prayer, like a chant, like the words themselves had the power to repay a debt that could never be repaid. "They told me what you did. They told me everyone ran and you stayed. You stayed with my brother." "He asked me to stay," Emily said. "That was enough." Maria's face crumpled. She pulled Emily into a hug, fierce, desperate, the hug of a stranger who has become family in the space of a single night. Emily stood rigid for a moment, surprised, and then she softened. She let Maria hold her. She let herself be held. Over Maria's shoulder, she saw Marcus watching them. He was crying silently, the tears running down the sides of his face into his bandages, and his massive hands were clenched in the hospital blanket, gripping the thin fabric as if it were the edge of a cliff. Maria released her. Emily walked to the side of Marcus's bed and looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since the adrenaline had cleared. In the quiet of the recovery room, without the blood and the chaos and the primal terror of the ER, she could see who he was. His face was gentle. His eyes, now evenly dilated and responding normally to light, were soft brown and deep and full of a kindness that the brain injury had buried but could not destroy. "Marcus, how are you feeling?" "Like somebody parked a truck on my head." He tried to smile. The smile wobbled and collapsed halfway through. "They told me what I did, what I broke, who I scared. I can't live with that. I walked into a hospital and terrorized people who were trying to help other people. How do I come back from that?" Emily pulled the chair close. She sat down the same way she had sat down 4 hours ago, close, deliberate, present. "Marcus, you didn't walk into a hospital and terrorize anyone. You walked into a hospital because your brain was bleeding and the bleeding stole your control. Everything you did in that ER was the injury, not you, the injury. You need to understand that distinction because it's the most important distinction there is." "How do you know that? How can you be so sure?" Emily was quiet for a moment. She looked at her hands. She looked at the monitor, tracing Marcus's heartbeat. She looked at Maria, who was standing by the window with her arms crossed over her chest, watching Emily with an intensity that bordered on reverence. "Because my brother had the same injury," Emily said. "Traumatic brain injury. Car accident when he was 19. For 6 years, I watched the sweetest person I've ever known turn into someone he didn't recognize. He threw things. He screamed. He put his fist through doors. And every single time after the episode passed, he sat exactly where you're sitting right now and asked the same question you just asked me. How do I come back from that?" Marcus stared at her. "What did you tell him?" "The same thing I'm telling you. It wasn't you. It was never you. The person who threw furniture and broke glass, that person doesn't exist. He's a ghost created by the injury, and he disappears the moment the injury is treated. You're the man who sings gospel songs in his truck. That's who you are. That's who you've always been. And nothing that happened tonight changes that." Marcus's chin trembled. He looked up at the ceiling and then squeezed his eyes shut, and 2 tears slid from the corners and ran down into the bandages. "What happened to your brother?" he asked quietly. Emily had known the question was coming. She had heard it approach from the moment she mentioned Daniel, moving toward her with the slow inevitability of a tide. She could dodge it, she could deflect, she could give a clinical answer: "He passed away, complications from his injury," and leave it at that. But Marcus had given her his trust when he had nothing else to give. He had dropped his fist because she asked him to. He had let strangers touch him because she told him it was safe. The least she could give him back was the truth. "He died," Emily said, 2 years ago. A seizure in his sleep. I found him in the morning." The room went still. Maria pressed her hand over her mouth. Marcus opened his eyes and looked at Emily with an expression that she had never seen directed at her before. Not gratitude, not admiration, but recognition. The recognition of one wounded person seeing another wounded person and understanding in the wordless language of shared pain that they were members of the same terrible club. "And you still came to me," Marcus said. "You saw a man doing the same things your brother did, and instead of running, you came to me. You needed someone to come. But it could have been anyone. Anyone could have tried." "No," Emily shook her head. "It couldn't have been anyone. It had to be someone who understood, and I understood." Marcus reached for her hand. She gave it to him. His grip was weak, nothing like the desperate clutch of hours earlier, but it was deliberate, intentional. A choice made by a man in full possession of his faculties, for the first time since a blow to his head had stolen them. "I'm sorry about your brother," he said. "I'm glad you're alive," she said. They held hands in the quiet room while the monitors beeped and the sun began to push its first pale light through the window, and the hospital stirred awake around them, floor by floor, room by room, life by life. 6:58, Edwin. Emily's phone buzzed. A text from Denise. "Elliot's here. Conference room B. 5 minutes." Emily squeezed Marcus's hand one last time and stood up. Maria walked her to the door and hugged her again, shorter this time, tighter. The kind of hug that says everything that needs saying without a single word. Emily walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She looked at her reflection in the brushed steel doors, same scrubs, same dark circles, same exhaustion, written across her face like a sentence she couldn't finish. But her eyes were different. She could see it, even in the warped metallic reflection. Something behind them had shifted, settled, hardened in the way that iron hardens in fire, not brittle, not rigid, but tempered. Made stronger by the heat, the elevator arrived, the doors opened. Emily stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor. Dr. Elliot was waiting. The review was waiting. The consequences of every choice she had made tonight, the defiance, the diagnosis, the threat. The promise were waiting in a conference room at the end of a hallway, and she had no idea whether she would walk out of that meeting or the nurse, or as an unemployed 24-year-old with a story nobody would believe. She pressed her back against the elevator wall. She closed her eyes. She breathed. 6:59 a.m. The elevator descended. Emily Carter straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and watched the numbers count down toward whatever came next. 7:02 a.m. The elevator doors opened, and Emily walked out into a hallway that felt longer than it had any right to be. Conference room B was at the far end, past the administrative offices, past the HR department, past a water cooler that nobody ever used because the water tasted like plastic and regret. Her shoes squeaked on the tile with every step, and the sound echoed off the walls like a metronome counting down to something she couldn't control. She stopped outside the door, took one breath, then another. Then she pushed the door open and walked inside. Dr. Robert Elliott, chief of medicine at Riverside General Hospital, was sitting at the head of the conference table. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, square-jawed, and built like a man who had played college football 40 years ago and never quite let go of the posture. His reading glasses were perched on the end of his nose, and a thick folder was open in front of him. The incident report, Emily assumed, along with whatever Reeves had told him over the phone at 5 in the morning. Reeves was already seated. He was in a fresh shirt he'd changed at some point during the night, Emily noticed, as if a clean collar could erase the last 7 hours. Denise sat across from him, still in her scrubs, still wearing the same expression she'd worn since Marcus hit the floor. The look of a woman who had seen something shift and was waiting to see where it landed. Ron Phelps was there too in the corner, his bandaged hand resting on his knee. And Sharon from radiology, who had read the CT scan, and the 2 orderlies who had helped get Marcus on the gurney. Everyone who had been part of the night was in this room, and every one of them looked at Emily when she walked in. "Nurse Carter," Dr. Elliott said. "Sit down, please." Emily sat. The chair was cold. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Elliott looked at her over his glasses for a long moment. Then he looked down at the folder. He turned a page. He turned another. The silence stretched like a rubber band, and Emily could feel it pulling at her chest. "I've read the incident report," Elliott said. "I've spoken with Dr. Reeves. I've spoken with Nurse Holloway. I've reviewed the timeline, the CT results, and the surgical notes from Dr. Sung." He paused. "What I haven't heard yet is your account, in your own words. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it honestly." "Yes, sir." "And why did you approach the patient when you were directly ordered not to?" Emily had expected this question. She had rehearsed answers in her head during the walk down the hallway, clinical answers, professional answers wrapped in the language of protocols and patient outcomes in evidence-based practice. But sitting here now under the fluorescent lights with Dr. Elliott's eyes on her and Reeves's jaw clenched and Denise watching from across the table, every rehearsed answer fell away like dead leaves, and what was left was the truth. Raw, unpolished, hers. "Because I recognized what was happening to him," Emily said. "His pupils were uneven. His movements were uncoordinated. His speech was slurred in a way that indicated neurological distress, not intoxication. He wasn't attacking the ER because he wanted to hurt people. He was attacking the ER because his brain was malfunctioning and his body was in a state of terror that he couldn't control. I recognized those signs because I spent 6 years as the primary caregiver for my brother, who suffered a traumatic brain injury when I was 16. Elliott's pen stopped moving. He looked up. "Your brother, Daniel Carter. He sustained a TBI in a car accident in 2015. I cared for him until his death in 2022. During those years, I experienced hundreds of episodes identical to what Marcus Thompson exhibited last night: the aggression, the confusion, the loss of impulse control. I learned that the aggression was a symptom, not an intention. And I learned that de-escalation through calm verbal engagement was more effective than physical restraint or chemical sedation in those situations. That's not standard protocol, Nurse Carter." "No, sir, it's not. Standard protocol would have been to wait for security reinforcement and police arrival, then use chemical sedation under physician supervision. Yes, sir. And in the time it would have taken to follow standard protocol, Marcus Thompson's epidural hematoma would have progressed to herniation, and he would have died. Or he would have injured a staff member or patient during the wait, or both. Elliot set his pen down. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms and looked at Emily the way a chess player looks at a board that has just produced a move he didn't anticipate. Dr. Reeves, Elliot said without looking away from Emily, is Nurse Carter's assessment accurate? Reeves shifted in his chair. Emily could hear the fabric of his fresh shirt rustling against the seat back. He cleared his throat. The CT scan confirmed a 62 milliliter epidural hematoma in the left temporal region, Reeves said. His voice was measured clinical stripped of everything personal. Dr. Sung stated in her surgical note that the patient was within 15 to 20 minutes of herniation at the time of the scan. If we had followed standard protocol and waited for the neuroconsult callback, the delay would have been approximately 25 to 30 minutes. So yes, Nurse Carter's assessment is accurate. The expedited response likely saved the patient's life. And her de-escalation of the patient, Reeves paused. Emily watched his jaw work the muscles tightening and releasing like a man chewing on words he didn't want to swallow. Effective, Reeves said. Her de-escalation was effective. Elliot nodded. He turned to Denise. Nurse Holloway, in your professional opinion, did Nurse Carter's actions put anyone at additional risk? Denise sat up straighter. No, in my professional opinion, her actions reduced risk. The patient was escalating. He had already caused significant property damage and was exhibiting increasingly violent behavior. Every minute that passed without intervention was a minute closer to someone getting seriously hurt. Carter intervened and brought the situation under control, without physical force, without chemical restraint, and without injury to anyone on staff. In 14 years on this floor, I have never seen a de-escalation executed that effectively. The room went quiet. Elliot looked at his folder again. He turned another page. He read something and his eyebrows rose slightly, a micro-expression that Emily caught and filed away, her stomach tightening. There's one more matter, Elliot said. Nurse Carter, Dr. Reeves, has reported that you made a direct threat against him during the course of the incident. Specifically, that you stated you would report him to the chief of medicine and the local news if he did not immediately authorize surgical intervention. Is that accurate? Emily's hands went cold. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room on her. Ron Phelps shifted in his corner. Sharon looked at the table. The orderlies stared at their shoes. Yes, sir, Emily said. That's accurate. You understand that threatening an attending physician is a serious violation of hospital conduct policy. I do. And you understand that insubordination, refusing a direct order from a supervising physician, is grounds for immediate termination. I do. Elliot removed his glasses. He set them on the table and folded his hands and looked at Emily with an expression that she couldn't read, not stern, not sympathetic. Somewhere between the two, in the gray space where decisions are made that change the course of people's lives. Nurse Carter, do you believe your actions were justified? Emily thought about the question. She thought about Marcus's fist raised and trembling, ready to strike. She thought about his voice broken and desperate, crying out for help in a language his own brain wouldn't let him speak. She thought about Dr. Reeves clicking his pen twice slowly while a man's brain was being crushed by its own blood. She thought about Daniel. She thought about the morning she found him still and silent in his bed, the coffee growing cold in her hand. Dr. Elliot, Emily said, Marcus Thompson walked into this emergency room because his brain was failing and he had nowhere else to go. He couldn't speak clearly. He couldn't control his body. He couldn't tell us what was wrong. The only thing standing between him and death was the speed of our response. When I felt that response was being delayed, I did what I believed was necessary to accelerate it. I threatened a physician I respect because I believed that a man I had promised to protect was running out of time. Was I insubordinate? Yes. Would I do it again without hesitation? If that means I lose my job, then I lose my job. But Marcus Thompson is alive and I can live with any consequence that comes with that. The room was so quiet that Emily could hear the clock on the wall ticking. She could hear Ron breathing. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, steady and strong, pumping blood through a body that had been pushed beyond every limit she thought she had. Elliot picked up his glasses. He put them back on. He closed the folder. Here's what's going to happen, he said. Nurse Carter, there will be no disciplinary action taken against you. Your intervention last night prevented a catastrophic outcome, and I'm not in the business of punishing people for saving lives. However, I am going to require you to complete a formal crisis intervention training course within the next 60 days. Not because you need it, frankly. You could probably teach it, but because this hospital needs documentation that our staff is equipped to handle these situations, and I want your skills on the record. Emily blinked. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Additionally, Elliot continued, I'm recommending that this hospital adopt a revised de-escalation protocol based on verbal intervention techniques. I'm going to ask you to work with our training department to develop that protocol. You'll be compensated for the additional hours. Emily stared at him. You want me to write a protocol? I want the person who just talked down a 7-foot man with a brain bleed to teach the rest of us how she did it. Is that a problem? No, sir, that's not a problem. Good. Elliot stood. Everyone else stood too reflexively, the way people stand when the person with the most authority in the room decides the meeting is over. Dr. Reeves, a word in my office, please. Everyone else gets some rest. You've earned it. Reeves followed Elliot out without looking at Emily. Denise caught Emily's eye as they filed out of the conference room and gave her a nod, small, firm, final. The nod of a woman who had just watched the right thing happen in a world where the right thing almost never does. 7:26 a.m. Emily walked out of the hospital through the side entrance, past the plywood where the ER doors used to be, into a morning that was already warm. The sun was above the tree line and the parking lot was filling with day shift cars. And somewhere a bird was singing with the aggressive optimism of a creature that had no idea what had happened inside this building 7 hours ago. Emily stood on the sidewalk. She breathed. The air tasted different than it had when she'd arrived for her shift the previous evening, cleaner somehow, fuller, as if the atmosphere itself had been rinsed and wrung out and hung up to dry. Her phone buzzed. Maria Thompson. Marcus is asking for you again. He says he wants to say thank you properly. When you're ready, no rush. Emily typed back, tell him I'll visit tomorrow. Tell him to rest. She got in her car. She put her hands on the steering wheel and sat there for a full minute, not driving, not thinking, just existing. Just being alive in a body that had done something extraordinary and was now expected to simply go home and function as if the world hadn't tilted on its axis. She drove home. She took a shower. She stood under the water for a long time, watching the faint pink swirl of diluted blood. Marcus's blood, her blood, from a cut on her palm, she didn't remember getting circle the drain and disappear. She put on clean clothes. She sat on the edge of her bed. On the nightstand was a photograph in a simple wooden frame, Daniel, age 22, before the accident, grinning at the camera with the carefree confidence of a young man who believed the world was made of good things and good people, and nothing could touch him. Emily picked up the photograph. She held it in both hands. I kept my promise, Danny, she whispered. I stayed. She set the photograph back on the nightstand. She lay down. She closed her eyes. She slept. 3 months later. Emily Carter stood at the nurse's station in the emergency room of Riverside General Hospital, filling out a chart. The new doors had been installed 6 weeks after the incident, reinforced steel frames with shatter-resistant glass and a locking mechanism that could withstand, according to the manufacturer, up to 2,000 pounds of force. Nobody had tested that claim, and nobody wanted to. The ER was busy. A Tuesday night just after 11, and the waiting room was full coughs and cuts and broken hearts disguised as chest pains. The usual symphony of human fragility that played on repeat in every emergency room, in every city, in every corner of the country. Emily was not the same person who had stood in this spot 3 months ago. She looked the same height, same build, same dark hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail. But something behind her eyes had hardened and softened simultaneously, the way steel becomes both stronger and more flexible when it's been properly tempered. She moved through the ER with a quiet authority that had nothing to do with years on the job and everything to do with what she had survived. The crisis intervention protocol she had written was now mandatory training for all ER staff. She had taught the first session herself, standing in front of 30 nurses and physicians and security personnel, and she had told them the truth. Not the clinical truth, not the textbook truth, but the human truth. That the most dangerous person in an emergency room, is not the one who is violent. It is the one who is afraid. And the most powerful tool any of them will ever carry is not a syringe or a restraint or a radio. It is the willingness to stay. Marcus Thompson had visited her twice since his discharge. The first time he brought flowers, a massive bouquet of sunflowers that looked almost comically small in his enormous hands. He stood in the ER lobby with tears streaming down his face and handed them to her and said, "I don't remember what I did that night, but I remember what you did, and I will remember it for the rest of my life." The second time he brought his mother's recipe for sweet potato pie, handwritten on a yellowed index card, and he told Emily that his mother used to say the card should go to whoever saved his life someday because his mother had known, with the quiet certainty of mothers everywhere, that her son's big heart and bigger body would lead him into trouble that only kindness could fix. Emily kept the recipe card in her locker. She hadn't made the pie yet. She was saving it for a day when she needed to remember that the world could be sweet. 11:13 p.m. The ER doors opened. Not violently, not explosively. They opened the way doors are supposed to open, smoothly, automatically, with a quiet hiss of hydraulics, and a young woman walked in. She was 22, maybe 23, with wide eyes and new scrubs, and the particular combination of terror and determination that Emily recognized the way a veteran recognizes a fresh recruit, a new nurse, first week on the job. Emily could see it in the way she held her clipboard too tight, pressed against her chest like a shield, in the way her eyes darted from station to station trying to absorb everything at once, in the way she stood just inside the entrance, frozen by the overwhelming reality of a place where life and death played out in real time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without intermission. Emily set down her pen. She walked over to the young woman and stopped in front of her. The new nurse looked up at Emily with an expression that Emily knew intimately because she had worn it herself 29 days into her own career, standing in the same spot, feeling the same crushing certainty that she was not enough. "First night?" Emily asked. "Is it that obvious? Only to someone who remembers her own?" The new nurse tried to smile. The smile failed about halfway, caught between courage and collapse. "I'm terrified," she said. "I don't know why I thought I could do this." Emily looked at her. She looked at the new scrubs and the white shoes and the hands gripping the clipboard and the eyes that were wide with a fear that went deeper than the brow. The fear of inadequacy, the fear of failure, the fear that the distance between who you are and who you need to be is too vast to cross. "What's your name?" Emily asked. "Jessica. Jessica Ramirez." "Jessica, my name is Emily. And I'm going to tell you something that nobody told me on my first night, and I wish they had because it would have saved me a lot of suffering." Jessica waited. Her knuckles were white on the clipboard. "You are going to make mistakes," Emily said. "You are going to freeze when you should move, and move when you should freeze, and say the wrong thing, and forget the right thing, and go home at the end of some shifts, wondering if you just made someone's worst day even worse. That's going to happen, and it's going to feel like proof that you don't belong here." Jessica's eyes glistened. "But here's what nobody tells you. The fact that you're terrified right now, the fact that you care enough to be scared, that is the single most important qualification for this job. Because the nurses who stop being scared are the nurses who stop seeing their patients as people. And the moment you stop seeing people, you stop saving them." Jessica blinked. A single tear escaped and ran down her cheek. She wiped it quickly, embarrassed. "I was standing exactly where you are 3 months ago," Emily said. "Brand new scrubs, clean shoes, absolutely certain that I was going to fail. And then something happened on my 29th night that changed everything. Not because I was ready, I wasn't ready. Nobody is ever ready. It changed everything because I did the only thing I knew how to do. I stayed." She put her hand on Jessica's shoulder. "Come on, I'll show you around. And if tonight gets hard, and it will get hard, you come find me. I'm not going anywhere." Jessica nodded. She loosened her grip on the clipboard. She took a breath. They walked toward the nurse's station together, the veteran of 3 months and the rookie of 3 hours. And the ER hummed around them with the relentless, beautiful machinery of a place where people came broken and left whole, where the worst nights became the best lessons, where strength was measured not in force but in the willingness to remain. 11:17 p.m., Emily Carter glanced back once at the reinforced doors of the emergency room, the doors that a giant had torn apart with his bare hands, The doors that had been rebuilt stronger than before, just like her. She turned back to Jessica Ramirez and walked forward, because that's what Emily Carter did. She walked toward the thing that everyone else ran from. She stayed when staying cost her everything. And she proved on one unforgettable night at Riverside General Hospital that the most powerful force in any emergency room is not medicine, not technology, not authority. It is one human being looking at another human being in their darkest moment and saying the only words that have ever truly saved a life. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You're safe now, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes that is enough to bring down giants.